Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. And today we are having an exclusive conversation, something that we have been trying to organize for a minute and something I've been getting a lot of questions to do. After reviewing the band's latest record, Lonely People with Power, of course, I'm talking about the band Deafheaven. Their frontman, George Clarke, has been gracious enough to take the time to have a conversation with me today. George, thank you for coming through. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Um, let me, I guess, ask off the bat. I mean, are you and the band still buzzing off of having created what by many is kind of seen as is really the best metal record of the year? Because the record's reviews and reception has been one of the strongest that you guys have seen in a very long time.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's been great. Yeah, I think mostly this kind of response has reflected in the touring, and for us, that kind of remains the most important part. Being able to see people in the world, connect with them that way, and that has been really, really nice. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Um, how much of that sort of like crowd reaction or crowd interaction would you say kind of comes into play even with this new record when you guys are writing and are recording? I mean, I've had conversations with artists and bands where maybe I guess the connection there is a little bit more obvious when you're talking about something that's maybe more in the realm of metalcore. Like you're doing something, you're literally looking for a physical,
Yeah.
explosive reaction from the crowd through something like the mosh pit. Obviously, when you're talking about that same sort of connection, like what do you guys feel like you're trying to, elicit from the crowd per se?
I do think that with this album, um, we had much more intention as far as that was concerned. I don't think in previous records we've thought about it as much.
Mm.
I do think there are things that we do that cater to crowd reactions. I think that having sort of like a crescendo at the end with poignant lyrics and things like that. These are like things that we like to do in songwriting, but it also factors into the live show quite well. And I think that those ideas were a bit more considered this time. I think to your point, to the metalcore thing, I think that we toured with some heavier bands in between albums. I think touring in general in between albums really kind of bolstered this idea. With our last one, which we had made during the pandemic, and we were inside the whole time, it really lended itself to a kind of quieter feeling. I think that we were,
Mm.
I mean, it's just music you write when you're sitting in your living room, and getting to tour and getting to play in front of audiences again and getting to be on stage again. Sorry, my neighborhood always has sirens going off.
It's totally fine. You're good.
Uh, when we're in that mode, we want to be aggressive and we want to be heavy and fast, and that's what that is kind of built for. So I think that sort of like the whole previous touring cycle um, also lended itself to kind of what we ended up making, which was a bit more urgent.
Mm. Would you say is this like a false characterization or view to also sort of see the album as um, maybe a bit of a retrospective or the start of a new chapter because it does sort of come after what's like a pretty clean 10-year period between the band's debut album and Infinite Granite. And it, in a lot of respects, it seems like, all the tracks in totality, each of them in their own way kind of touches down on a different sound or genre or style that you guys have like experimented with here and there in the past. And it all sort of like fits under one umbrella in kind of like a very equal and balanced way.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I appreciate that because I do think that's true. I think that for us, there's just not a lot of like blueprint
Mm.
for what follow in terms of what we're trying to make, um, and the sound we're kind of trying to build. And I think that for us, that just has taken time. And the sort of final piece to that, at least what is now like this initial puzzle, was Infinite Granite. And once we had kind of made that and really gotten it out of our systems, um, uh, we were able to take the bits of that album that we really liked, the way we structured songs, things like that, and kind of analyze it along with the rest of our records to sort of see more clearly what exactly like who we were. And Carrie and Carrie, who does most of the songwriting, we're always sort of having long conversations about what we want to do next. And we were just talking about how, like, for the first time, the Deafheaven sound feels across all these records realized. Like we kind of know which things are our strengths, and what can we do now that we know this to create a more refined, more whole, record. And I think that's what we tried to do. Yeah.
Hmm. Uh, if you could also kind of explain, like, what is it to create an album not only under those conditions, but also, I think, like, with an additional challenge that not a lot of bands face, and that's the fact that, like, you have this record Sunbather, which is well over 10 years old at this point, but, like, with each passing year, the record sort of seems more and more solidified as, like, a modern metal and a modern black metal classic. And, so it seems like, whether, you guys nail down another record that is just as good or better or not, it sort of seems like that album is going to continue to kind of, like, almost have like a life of its own, outside of that, transcends the band itself. And it's interesting that the record has reached that status in such a short kind of period of time. It's like this additional member of the band in a way that, like, that you've always got to kind of account for, is it difficult to write or create in a way, where maybe sometimes you have to kind of, like, sidestep or take into account, like, we've been here, or, and we want to do something new, or, like, regardless of what we try or experiment with, this image of the band is going to be locked in people's heads because they just sort of hold this album in such high regard?
It's kind of great, it is funny because it does have a life of its own. I feel like, I mean, it has its own, like, meme culture, and I think
No, it
like,
does.
yeah, which is like, hey, that's fantastic. And I've even seen people think that, like, the name of the band is Sunbather and all these kinds of things. So it's cool. I'm glad that we can kind of, I had said to a friend, some time ago, but, like, I don't, it's a record I don't really actively think about ever. We're always sort of face forward with what we're trying to do.
Of course.
But I feel very lucky that, that even if it says defines our musical legacy or whatever, that, like, it's something that I'm proud of to have made. And that B, it really, its success and its sort of cult success takes the pressure off of making anything new. It feels like, okay, we're not searching to make our seminal piece of work. If it happens, and we say Lonely People with Power in the future, like, gets viewed as our seminal piece of work, or what have you, like, that's great. But I know people who often, are seeking that kind of thing, who have not yet had it. And I feel like we experience that. It's not always great. I think at the time it's funny now because it does have this kind of reverence to it. But at the time it was really kind of mostly stressful. And we were like 24 and just sort of making music. And Um, and like you said, it kind of took on a life of its own, and people were very opinionated about it, and people that we respected who were older than us were very opinionated about it. And there was a certain point where we were like, God, like I don't know if this is, really what I wanted in the end. So it's funny to kind of reflect on it, but it doesn't it doesn't give any kind of pressure. I think it's cool that it's there, and so like now when people say praise records, or we start to get attention for something we've made, I don't feel so anxious about it like I did when it was happening at that time.
Hmm. I want to dig further into that because I think that's some necessary context that a lot of people don't necessarily have for that album or that era of metal at this point, because I think a lot of it has been kind of like lost in the sands of time of like the music blogosphere and everything going on at the moment. But like, as you were kind of alluding to, you and, several other key bands at the time were almost like the canary in the coal mine for this, out of nowhere American black metal wave that was happening. And, while yes, it is true, like you said, Sunbather is a widely beloved album at this point. Your band and many others, I would imagine, especially Sunbather in many cases because of how popular it was getting and how much attention it had gotten at the time, we're just catching a lot of flack left and right from metal purists and, black metal fans who thought like these American bands are shit, or, this is how you make a record in this genre and this shouldn't be allowed and that shouldn't be allowed. I mean, at the time when you guys were, making this music, was that at all something that mentally or maybe in a literal sense was an obstacle in any way, sort of like facing this backlash against, you guys just innocently creating with sounds that you thought were interesting, but, for many other people maybe had elements of cultural baggage that they only wanted to see presented or perceived in a certain very specific way?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think that we thought about it a lot. I think that we were, I remember in interviews just being like, these are just songs.
Right.
Like we wrote, Carrie and I quite literally shared a living room, uh, and we both slept on the floor, and we had a sheet that was tacked up in the corner, and he was on the inside of the sheet, and that was his private space, and I was on the outside of the sheet. And in a house full of six other people. So we were just hanging out at night and jamming on like a practice amp. It was very very small, very kind of like a humble thing. So yeah, for it to have gotten all this reaction, we were like, pretty taken aback by it. I think at the time as well, and you can correct me because I don't know if I'm right on here. I don't pay attention as much as I used to, and I definitely very much used to. But I feel like the media landscape was a bit more attention seeking, and there were lots of articles at the time that were coming out that were like, they were like, corpse paint does suck, like this is why Deafheaven's the best, this kind of thing that was reflected on us, that was making people mad, for traffic, essentially, or what felt like amounted to traffic. And we were, we were kind of the poster boy for this. And I remember again, Carrie and I being like, hey, like we're just here to play songs. And
Right. It's right. It's not that deep. We're not trying to like, take on the black metal orthodoxy. We're just making songs that we like.
yeah, yeah, and they were meaningful songs, and we gave a lot of ourselves to them, and they were very
Right.
personal and that kind of thing. But like, I think that people thought that we were being intentionally antagonistic, and that was
Mm-hmm.
never the case. We just wanted to do our what we thought was our own version of a thing that we really liked.
Yeah, the discourse at the time, be it in the writer space or the fan space, was very hot, and I do think a lot of it kind of came down to people who weren't necessarily the artists operating in these bands. I mean, I can think of maybe a few examples of certain bands that did kind of take a certain kind of pride of not being sort of in the normal sort of old school Scandinavian black metal tradition, like Liturgy, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
But it seemed like most of the groups, like you guys, were just kind of like, no, we just like the sound. We're just going to make our own songs with it. Like it's as you said, it's not supposed to be antagonistic in spirit against like the bands who are obviously influencing you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. But with that being said, like, what kind of mindset goes into some of the records on this new album stylistically and sonically, where it seems like, I love the way they came out. Like Magnolia, for example, many tracks that sort of seem like you're kind of getting rid of the post-hardcore, like the shoegaze pretense that you guys were experimenting with on earlier records. And then you're just like, this is just a straight black metal song. And we're just going to absolutely rip through it and write something fiery and explosive.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and a lot of that is due to Carrie, and a lot of it is actually really strangely indebted to Infinite Granite because, like,
Mm,
the whole difficult thing about making that album was trying to rid ourselves of old songwriting habits, which is
mm,
like kind of what you're saying, like listen, stuff that sort of defines our more classic sound. Like, there's a lulling bridge and then a big crescendo and these sort of post rock tropes, and we wanted to, in a way, eliminate those and try and create something that was interesting and still got you to that emotional point, but did so without needing to spend 9 minutes. We're like, let's try and keep it to like 4 or 5 minutes, which for us was like a really kind of wild concept. We're like, oh my God, like, how are we gonna, we still wanted the emotional impact, but we wanted to trim the fat. And Infinite was really sort of there to help us do that, and that was a big part of like that songwriting exercise, which is a lot of that record really sort of is. And then we took that and we were like, we want to beef this up again, and we want to be heavy, we want to write something heavy, but I really like that we've trimmed this because it's more fun to play live. There's an immediacy there that is engaging, not only for, I think, the listener or the person experiencing the show, but for us as well. There would be like times on stage where I would be, standing for 4 minutes while the guys, were going through these sort of like beautiful, kind of chord progressions and things and these builds that they, that I really am a fan of, um, but that we wanted to, kind of flip inside out. And so that's really where that comes from. It's just sort of taking those things that we kind of learned over the past few years and applying them in a metallic way. And even like as we continue to write, because we're always sort of writing, I see Carrie going further into this, and he's really developing this kind of nastier sound as he keeps playing, which I think is very cool and invigorating.
no, I mean, for sure. Like some of the highlights on the record are some of the, like the most nasty recordings that you guys have come out with in a long, long time. Um, but also, if you could like speak to the fact that I feel like this is also possibly your most varied album so far, because juxtaposed against that nastiness and extremity of tracks like Magnolia, and we'll get into the lyrical themes soon as well, you do also have not just mellower cuts and spots that are maybe more post-rock inspired or jangly and post-punky a little bit too. But you've also got like, droney incidental cuts and the Paul Banks, interestingly enough, spoken word passage and everything. It seems like there's so many different moving parts to this album, and you're trying to balance them all out through a really ambitious track list flow.
Yeah.
What exactly was that process like, trying to nail down something that's so multi-phased and almost like cinematic in a way?
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. The the word cinematic, the cinema of it is something that was intentional. I think that again, kind of like I said earlier, there's not a whole lot of blueprint for what we feel like we're trying to do. And so
Mhm.
sequencing is always on our minds and it's always a challenge. And sometimes we nail it and sometimes we don't. And I feel like for this one, it was just a thought at the very beginning. We knew that we wanted these sort of um, stitch tracks. We knew that we wanted to create a mood. Um, but like at each juncture, as far as like the incidentals go, the interludes, like for each one, there was a point where we were considering cutting it, and we were like, I just don't know because like they were evolving, and and it did sometimes feel like we were kind of ham fisting something, um, and uh, and I'm glad that we stuck through it because I think for me the album is meant to be listened to front to back, and I think that it does go through these kind of peaks and valleys, you know, quite nicely. But yeah, it's always a kind of a pain in the ass, you know, to be frank. But I'm glad the way they came out, and then also having Jay and Paul involved with the process pushed our willingness to see them through. You know, once those pieces came in, I was like, no, this is conceptually very, for me, very interesting. I think that we really like put our foot down about it. So we did.
Could you go into a little bit like the origins behind Paul's spoken word passage there, and sort of like, as we maybe start to dig into the themes of the album a little bit, like, what you guys feel like that adds to the album, and what about the way that it's presented does that, as opposed to like, hey, let's maybe work this into maybe another anthem or a ballad or something like more formal, something that people who've been listening to us might expect.
Totally. It was one of the last things that I had written, and honestly, it didn't have a place in anything else. So, I mean, the lyrics were kind of were pretty set, but I really liked it, and it actually at this point is like probably my favorite thing lyrically on the record. And we had this bed of music that was leading into Winona, and we knew that we wanted to sort of develop that long palette, and we thought to help drive that, a monologue would be cool. He was like the first person on a short list of who I thought would be interesting. We had kind of made friendships with the Interpol guys, and I've been a longtime fan, and I like his tone of voice. And so when we got in touch, I sent him the lyrics, and he was like, "This is cool. I really like this." And it's like just a few days later, he sent back all these different versions. We kind of talked about how he wanted to deliver it, or how I wanted him to deliver it, which was, to say in a bit more kind of sensitive, reflective way,
Hmm.
which I think he nailed. And then Carrie just massaged it into the track, and I think it sort of adds a lot. It's also, um, I mean, it's about visiting a sex worker. It's about that. It's like I think that it can be interpreted in many ways, and I'm happy for it to be. But from my perspective, that's what it was. And so it also ends up really influencing the cover, which is for me the cover art is essentially it's a version of Incidental Three, the lyrics.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, which of course, I mean, I do want to get into, because I mean, in terms of that, the themes of the album, the cover, even the title, just like everything about the record is just so holistic in terms of like what it's trying to get across. I mean, just kind of getting into the origin of the cover. I mean, was that sort of like a concept or a visual that you had in your mind already? And secondly, how exactly did we get to a point where veteran porn star Jenna Hayes is in the mix and is literally on the cover, which I didn't even know at first. Hilariously enough, the way that I came across this was I just so happened to, in my Twitter timeline, see her arguing with another porn actress about politics.
Okay.
And Jenna Hayes had the more based opinion. I'll say that I was
Love
on
to
Jenna
hear.
Hayes' side,
Love to hear.
and then I was like, wow, I didn't know Jenna Hayes was on Twitter arguing with other porn stars about like Trump and taxes and tariffs and so on and so forth. And then when I went on her page, like I might have been one of her latest tweets or like her pin tweet, and she's like, "I'm on an album cover, y'all. Check this out." And I was like, "Oh, what the fuck?" And so like how exactly did that crossover happen? Because I mean, it seems like a very, if it is a coincidence, seems like a very interesting coincidence that somebody who has a history in that industry, it ends up on the cover where you're making obviously a very interesting and poignant social statement about, power dynamics and sex work and so on and so forth.
Totally. Yeah, it is funny actually how it ended up. And there wasn't a plan for it to have wound up that way. Um, Firstly, Jenna has been amazing. Great to work with. Um, Very supportive of the album and everything that's kind of happened subsequently.
And she's taken part in some other like promo visuals that you guys have done around like
A ton of
the
promo
tracks.
visuals. She's on merch.
Right.
She's on tour posters and everything. She reposts and is very excited about. She came to the release party and she came to the show, and she's really really great. And we've actually, because she had sort of no idea what she was um, necessarily getting involved with. We've since like talked about the record more and all these kinds of things, and it's really nice that she she's connected with it so much. But really, it happened. Neda Afsari, who did the photography and the video work for the album, was just friends with her, and
Mm.
we were. I wanted to make these videos. I wanted to make these vignettes that we used to roll the record out, and so we were casting people, and she sent me the sheet, and I was like, well, yeah, great. We met the day that we did the shoot, and the rest is kind of history. But yeah, I didn't know her from before, and we have no connection otherwise. But it's been really great to have her on board. Yeah, she's been awesome.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you guys have created some kind of like Deafheaven indie metal porn community crossover contingent as,
I
as a
hope so.
result of all of
I
this that
hope
just wasn't there before.
so.
You know, digging further than that though, like how before we get into some of the lyrics and everything, like how would you say like this visual and the storytelling on the Paul Banks track and all of that like tie into the title of the record? Was the message there like already kind of envisioned before you kind of had this or this this visual for the cover kind of came together?
It was actually, and they kind of developed alongside each other. The title sort of has to do, I think, with the more obvious kind of macro, which is to say that people who tend to want to amass power, people that tend to seek levels of high influence, are people who, I'm talking like very high, are people who sort of lack personal relationships, and there's a what I always kind of call like a spiritual void or something that needs to be filled with um, the want for power, and I just had been thinking about that a lot in reading history and obviously assessing a lot of personal politics and things like that, or not personal, like contemporary politics. And then as the lyrics were going, I think that Deafheaven has always been sort of a vessel for the self. I think that everything we do is very personal, and it's very much from our experience. And I think that sometimes the best thing that an artist can offer is their perspective, and that if you nail that and you speak it in a really honest way, that the personal kind of becomes universal. People sort of
Mm.
find that, they find their own experience in what you're conveying. And so I was like, this is important. It's important that I, in a clear way, kind of give my perspective. And so this title sort of became, in the micro, a bit more personal, in thinking about people in our own lives who have power and have influence, and and I use loneliness as sort of a broad concept. Sometimes it means ignorance, and I think that when we deal with parents or parental figures, uncles, teachers, things like this, these people don't often. I think that, try as they may, don't often know what it is that they're trying to teach. And I think that you will absorb their worldview, and in ways that, are positive and negative, and that are worth examining, as you get older. And so this record is very much in that. It's an examination of things that I learned, that I was taught, that have kind of shaped points of view, and things that, I'm not alone in. But yeah, anyway.
No, it is true. A lot of the lyrical content does obviously come from a personal place, especially when you're talking about like some of these experiences dealing in moments or times when power or influence is taken advantage of. But when you sort of like export that into this greater sense of like, this is important, this should be talked about, um, is it just simply the personal that kind of like drives you to feel that way? Or is there something like kind of greater or broader happening in the world that was making you think at the time? Because you did kind of allude to maybe there being a social or political element there, that maybe led you to thinking, oh, this reminds me of this, or this reminds me of experiences in my own life. And I feel like I need to speak to that in some way. I mean, I'm not, literally making a one-to-one connection here. Obviously, since like, you guys were writing the album for quite a bit before this, but, it's interesting to think that a record like this and its themes are like, awfully poignant in an age of like controversy around things like, I don't know, the Epstein files or something, you know what I mean? Where you
Yeah.
have this broad abuse of influence and power and money, and people always end up being the victim. People who are powerless, in those situations, in the face of those who seem to have it all.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that, uh, it's something that sort of every generation sees too. I think that we obviously have our own, obvious examples of it. But yeah, I was doing a lot of reading about like Hearst at the time, and like his sort of, quest for political influence and things like that. And it really mirrors a lot of what we see today. And he really, and much of people of his ilk, yeah, they step on and do whatever that they can in this sort of quest for some greater fulfillment, which never really seems to come to fruition. Um, I think that for me, yeah, I think that when I try and boil it down, and it is hard to do a one-to-one, but I thought of what I was really thinking about was the way that men relate to each other,
Hmm.
and how, especially online and all these things, that there's such this arcing like question of what it is to be a man, or what men are supposed to teach each other, or what you're supposed to learn, and these kinds of things. And I feel like a lot of it's very misguided. And and it's just so increasingly prominent in our culture, and annoying, largely. Um, that like that a song like Body Behavior, which kind of deals directly with an older male trying to teach you about women by showing you porn, and asking you about it, and inquiring about it and things like that. It's not the like, there's nothing wrong with pornography or anything, in my opinion. It's more just like, it's this really shallow way of trying to relate, because there's some sort of like emotional barrier that keeps you from going deeper, and I found that for like men that are generations older than me, like that was often something I kind of endured. um, and I feel like today a lot of this sort of machismo attitude and stuff is very much reflected in like um, our politics, and political leaders, and the tech sphere and things like that. And yeah, I think that given the last, at this point, like a decade, of it, we're like really kind of um, seemingly like under the microscope, that helped me examine my own experiences with like the same thing.
Mm. No, I
Yeah.
mean, these, I guess, kinds of like interpersonal, I guess, experiences that you're alluding to, like with men, are still very much broken, and it sort of seems like it's a part of a much broader conversation now in terms of things like, I don't know, the loneliness epidemic, and incels, and the far right pipeline, and so on and so forth. How old are you? Let me check really quick if that's not.
I'm 36.
You're 30. Okay, so we're about the same age. No, I mean, I remember kind of like, growing up obviously with like the same generation of males that you're kind of talking about, and uh, like you said, there being kind of like, a machismo there, and an emotional barrier that, can't really be broken. I mean, people our age, like, will talk of like, oh, I never saw my dad cry, or something like that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it sort of seems like, I don't know, like maybe at one point it felt like there was a little bit of hope, and that things were kind of changing and softening, but now it sort of seems like the door is closed again. And maybe that's just my perception because of how my window to the world through the internet sort of just seems like so much more um, extreme maybe than it was at one point, which is probably enhanced by algorithms and just like kind of filtering the biggest weirdos on the planet to the top. And maybe your, average person is much more normal than you might think if you were just kind of basing your person to person interactions on a daily basis from what you just see on the internet. But still, it does sort of seem like there is a heightening of ideology, and a lot of people decrying like, oh, things, used to be great, used to be better, used to be da 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 da. And, and it seems like a lot of younger people are kind of echoing these sentiments when, personally, I remember growing up with that generation of men that you're talking about raising me. And most of them were depressed and hated themselves and were super bottled up and didn't really know what to do with their emotions, and were just so emotionally and functionally broken in so many ways. And I don't know. Do you feel like these issues that you remember, that I remember, it is this what we're seeing now a culmination? Is it a continuation of what you and I are alluding to, what we're familiar with, or is it kind of like broken in a new way from what you're seeing and what you're observing?
I mean, I think it's just more public because there's more access, and people can, people are very into sharing these things. And I think people feel very strengthened by um, agreeing opinions. I think that I don't think it's, I mean, certainly things, especially like in the American political climate, feel like they're in a pressure cooker. And I think culture wars and things like that are very much a topic of focus, much more so than they were when we were younger. But I think that these kind of frustrations in private certainly existed. I think that um, there's just a very visible outlet for them, and much to what you're saying about algorithms and things like that. I mean, I think that you consider who controls them and things like that, and it sort of it all kind of makes sense in a strange way. I think in much the same way that um, Hearst used newspapers to form public opinion. We see that with social media. We see that very much so with X and such. And I noticed this like in my own thing. It was really funny. Carrie and I kind of joke about this. Like, and I got I got rid of my Twitter, or I stopped using. Deafheaven has one, and it just reposts news or whatever. But I would also just use it kind of privately to like, because it's a good news aggregate, and then it really felt like all of a sudden I was like, why are we getting all this, you know, avatars with like Roman, head busts and stuff, saying like, like really like harping on about like antiquity and
Right.
and like like really just like crazy racist stuff. And it was I don't look at any of these things. So like, why has this? It felt like there was a real noticeable shift. Again, that could be, you know, maybe I'm being like sensitive about it or something, but I was like, this is good. I don't need to look at this. I can get my, news in other ways and what have you. But yeah, I guess all this to say that it feels like these sort of grotesque opinions are much more public, where like you might have overheard something like when we were young at like a party or something, between adults, when you're like, oh, that's like a weird point of view. I definitely remember hearing racist and sexist things like in the the privacy of people's homes. So I don't know. I guess we're all just a lot more exposed to it, and so it feels like it's really heated up.
Toward the start of the conversation, especially given like how much heart and focus and storytelling like went into a lot of the lyrics and themes on this album, you were kind of talking to like effectively communicating with the audience. I imagine mostly like with the sonics of the band at this point and eliciting certain like reactions from them just based off of like, the performance that you guys are giving like instrumentally and vocally and so on and so forth. But, considering everything that like you've just said, what about, kind of communicating with the audience on, I guess like what you could say a deeper level, especially given like, the metal audience generally tends to skew a lot more male, like, with the album having been out like for months at this point, and with you guys, like, I would say pretty proudly, like displaying the messaging and what you're trying to get across through everything, having to do with the record. Have you guys in your experience seen that like what you're trying to communicate, maybe even in some cases directly to men with this record, that like the messages that you're trying to put together here are like actually being received and picked up upon?
I mean, specifically, I'm honestly not sure. If I were to judge by crowd reaction and sort of the emotional response in a general way, I would say yes. I think though that, like, to be honest, like this conversation that we're having now, I have been very I've tried to be as direct as I can, especially through the lyrics and imagery and things like that, to convey these ideas. But like this conversation is probably the most candid I've been about like, or the most detailed I've been about my personal perspective as it relates to the album.
Hmm.
I think that without fully knowing what it is that I have personally attempted to address, the record in itself is still abstract enough. I think we write in a way that's still abstract enough, that invites a listener to fill in their own meaning. I think that the emotionality is still there, but I think that people take certain lyrical lines or certain kind of crescendos with a lyric or something like that, and it speaks to them in a way that it doesn't speak to me, but it does speak to them. And so that is so it's hard to say what specific thing they might be relating to, and I haven't actually had conversations with fans who have like directly said like, I'm glad that you said this kind of thing, but I have seen people really um, give themselves to the songs when we play them live, and that exchange, honestly, for me, is greater than anything I could spoon feed them. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I like that, and it
Yeah.
actually like their energy for whatever they're feeling
Hmm.
strengthens my resolve in some kind of way.
Hmm.
And I often find myself really connecting on stage with people at the front, and I think that like these moments that we have with crowd interaction are very real and very, I don't know, it's strange. It's like, like we're both kind of selfless in that moment. It's cool.
Hmm. No, I mean, of the several lengthier questions that have popped up in chat so far, they do all kind of like connect directly to the lyrics. There do seem to be like a lot of, at least some responses that I'm seeing of, to the amount of effort and focus that like went into all the themes across the album. So it does sort of like elicit a lot of curiosity. Um, let's talk a bit about sort of like where the band's at currently and going forward after an album cycle that is so well received, behind an album that is so ambitious, but simultaneously is kind of like I said earlier, kind of culminating a lot of different sounds and ideas that you guys have experimented with over the years. Like, what is the way forward at this point? Are you guys feeling reinvigorated to make your next record, experiment more, or stick to what sort of feels like familiar now that you guys have like a really firm idea of like what the Deafheaven strengths are?
Yeah, it's honestly at this juncture kind of hard to say. I do think that I think we always kind of, you know, nudge ourselves a little bit out of our comfort zone for whatever that we're going to make next. Um, I do think that this record was a pretty like exhaustive process, and so we will. Well, for one, we're touring very heavily, so we're going to be just touring a ton throughout this year and next year. And I kind of think whatever we do next will just maybe be songs. Maybe
Mm,
like put out a song. That's always like a really nice way to release a pressure valve.
mm,
And I think like in the past, we were really actually a lot more reliant on following up albums really quickly. I think that these days we have a little bit more latitude. We can take more time and sort of figure out what exactly it is that we want to do.
mm,
Um, but making songs, maybe a little EP, something like that, that always like helps. I know that like Carrie in particular is feeling very creative right now. He's in a real zone, and is kind of collecting on his own demos. I suspect that after this year's touring is done, he'll probably send them to me. We'll share with the band, and figure out what we want to do from there. But that sounds like the more fun thing for now. Not so like I love Lonely People with Power, but it is very like there's a lot of like kind of heft there. And it would be nice to maybe take a small departure from that.
And finally, I'm obviously just asking this because of recent events, but I feel like it's important to bring up because we just saw the passing of Ozzy Osbourne,
Mm.
and obviously that and his recent kind of big farewell concert kind of made me reflect on the fact that, like, I mean, there's really this entire web and world of music that just wouldn't be there if not for this guy. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah, of
Like
course.
literally every metal band,
It's
pretty
crazy.
much every metal
No,
band.
I know.
It's insane. There's like really only a few artists that, you could say if like they just didn't happen, I mean, we're talking about over time, like billions and billions and billions of dollars of records
It's
and,
insane.
tours and everything that
Yeah.
just wouldn't exist. Like, with the death of such a large looming figure, like, does that give you any kind of pause or sort of like, thoughts on like where exactly Deafheaven fits in that giant web of history and everything? Because even in some respects, like you guys are sure like a bit of a drop in a bucket and all of that, but simultaneously, like there's few bands that have effectively for as long as you have been in this, almost like one foot in the metal world, one foot of the indie world kind of thing, and have actually been like genuinely successful at it and have, conjured and, but rather what I want to say is just like have just like built lifelong fans, while having an appeal that kind of seems to fit in both of those contexts.
Yeah, that's cool. I know. And I mean, I mean, it's so hard to say. I mean, obviously we're all, everyone that even, pays any kind of attention to this genre is indebted to his work. And I kind of feel like today, like I've always felt, which is we're just, I mean, ultimately, and it's maybe it's like corny, but like we're just happy to be here, and like the opportunity. This is something that like I've lived with and loved as long as I could form my own opinions on music. Like it spoke to me at such an early age. It's been with me forever. Um, it's very much a part of me. To be a part of it um, is a huge honor, and to be, and I very much feel this way, just a drop in the bucket, but alongside so many people that I respect, both these real legacy guys and our contemporaries as well. People that I see work hard all the time, people that I see consistently put out good work, people that I see consistently tour and consistently get their art out to people that want to experience it. I mean, it really is profound, and I really don't take it for granted. And so I think that for Deafheaven, it's just a real blessing to do what we do and to be invited in this space and to hopefully, um, you know, make something that is meaningful to people that experience it.
George, I appreciate you coming through and taking the time, man.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Have a good one. Say hi to the rest of the band for me.
I will. Take care.